This isn't a planet. The soil, it's moving.
Is that warm soil?
They're still here. They're always here.
The Exodus shuddered as it breached the turbulent atmosphere of PX-119, its reinforced hull groaning under the pressure of descent. Outside the cockpit's reinforced glass, the planet unfolded like a dark, heaving mass, its surface marred by jagged ridges and what appeared to be deep organic trenches that pulsed with a faint, eerie glow. The planet's gravity pulled them in, stronger than anticipated, like the unseen grip of a predator dragging prey into its maw. Inside the ship, Malcolm Frost, the pilot, fought the controls, sweat beading at his temple despite the cooling systems in his suit. The Exodus wasn't responding as smoothly as it should have. It was as if something beyond the mechanical, beyond the explainable, was resisting their arrival. "Atmosphere's thicker than predicted," he muttered, voice strained. "Should be manageable, but we're getting turbulence that wasn't in the projections." Seated beside him, Dr. Lydia Hahn, the team's geologist, studied her display, her brow furrowed. "The air composition is strange. More nitrogen than expected, but there's something else." She stopped mid-sentence, her hand hovering over the console. "What?" Malcolm asked, his fingers gripping the yoke tighter as another violent jolt rattled the ship. Lydia exhaled, adjusting her visor. "There's a frequency, something low, almost like an interference signal, but it's coming from the ground." A hush fell over the cabin as the rest of the crew exchanged wary glances. "Interference?" Commander Reese Carter leaned over Lydia's station. "You're saying something's transmitting?" Lydia shook her head. "Not transmitting. It's more like a vibration, a hum beneath everything. I don't like it." "Well, we're past the point of turning back," Reese said. "We land, we scout, and we do what we came here for." The ship lurched violently again, then stabilized. The surface of PX-119 loomed closer, an undulating landscape that looked neither wholly mineral nor organic. The ground moved ever so slightly, as if breathing in anticipation of their arrival. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical hiss. The Exodus touched down with a dull, wet thump, sinking slightly into the soft terrain. A moment of stillness. Then a subtle, low-frequency tremor pulsed through the hull. Malcolm killed the engines. "We're down." Another tremor. Faint, almost imperceptible. "Did you feel that?" Cole Vance, the team's exobiologist, whispered. Everyone had. The vibration wasn't from the ship. It was coming from beneath them. The airlock hissed as it decompressed. Reese led the way, stepping onto the ramp, rifle slung across his chest. He paused at the threshold, taking in the alien landscape before stepping forward. His boots sank slightly, not into dust or sand, but into something softer. The rest of the team followed. Lydia, Cole, Malcolm, and Nico Devereaux, their engineer. The last member of their 6-person crew, Dr. Helena Rios, remained inside, monitoring from the ship. Helmet lights illuminated the terrain. At first glance, it looked like a barren wasteland, smooth black stone interrupted by occasional spires of twisted, crystalline formations. But the longer they looked, the more unsettling it became. The ground had texture. It wasn't smooth rock. It was something more intricate, more structured. Cole knelt, running a gloved hand over the surface. "This isn't what I expected." "What do you mean?" Reese asked. Cole hesitated before responding. "It looks biological, like carapace." Malcolm stiffened. "As in an exoskeleton?" Cole didn't answer immediately. He scraped at the surface with a small tool, revealing something wet beneath the hardened outer layer. A thin, translucent secretion clung to his gloves, glistening under the lights. Lydia took a step back. "That's not rock, that's tissue." Silence. The wind, if it could even be called that, whispered low and unsteady, carrying a strange scent, like iron and something spoiled. Reese exhaled. "Stay focused. We take samples, map the terrain, and locate the mineral deposits. We don't jump to conclusions." Lydia's gaze remained locked on the surface beneath them. "This is wrong," she thought. But she said nothing. She checked her wrist monitor. The seismic vibrations had stopped, and that somehow was worse. An hour passed. They ventured deeper into the alien landscape, following their scanners. The minerals they needed were theoretically buried beneath the crust, but no drilling was necessary. The planet had already split itself open in places, revealing glistening, pulsing veins of crystal buried in the exposed tissue of the ground. It was like wounds that refused to close. Malcolm pointed ahead. "That canyon, the scanners showing a larger deposit there." A jagged ravine cut across the terrain, its walls lined with dark, fibrous strands that looked too organic to be mere rock formations. A soft glow pulsed from somewhere deep inside. Lydia hesitated. "We shouldn't go in there." Reese looked at her. "Explain." She swallowed. "This doesn't feel geological. It feels like we're walking into something's body." Cole exhaled sharply. "Jesus, Lydia, can we not—" The ground quivered beneath their feet. The vibration was back. And then a sound. Not mechanical, not wind, not geological. Something wet shifting below them. The ship's comms crackled. Helena's voice cut through the static. "You need to get back now." Reese frowned. "What's going on?" "There's movement." Helena's voice was urgent. "Not just the atmosphere. The ship's sensors are picking up mass displacement below you. Something's waking up." Then the ground sank. The team stumbled as the earth beneath them flexed. Cracks widened, revealing fleshy ridges beneath the surface. The canyon ahead shuddered, and something deep inside shifted. A shape, something massive, something coiled, moved within the crevice. Not rock, not mineral, not plant. Something alive, something watching. And then from deep within the planet came a pulse, a soundless vibration so deep it resonated inside their bones. Lydia's breath hitched. It knows we're here. The ground trembled beneath them, a slow, deliberate ripple, as if something vast and unseen had just stirred from a deep slumber. Lydia's breath hitched. She felt the tremor not just underfoot, but inside her chest, as though the vibration resonated through her ribcage, syncing with her own heartbeat. "It knows we're here," she whispered again, her voice barely audible over the hum reverberating through the planet. Reese tightened his grip on his rifle, eyes locked on the canyon ahead, where shadows moved unnaturally within the walls of twisted, fibrous stone. Back to the ship. Now. Malcolm and Cole were already moving, but Nico hesitated, staring at the exposed ridges where the planet's crust had split. His hand hovered over the rock, inches from the slick, dark tissue glistening beneath. Nico swallowed. His voice was strained, almost reverent. "It's warm." Lydia turned. "What?" Nico looked up at her, his pupils dilated. "This isn't just biological. It's alive." Then the ground pulsed. Not an earthquake, not shifting tectonics. A contraction, a movement with intent. The canyon walls lurched inward, the dark ridges tightened like muscle fibers seizing. The distant hum rose into a low, guttural sound, like the deep inhale of a sleeping beast waking up. Then something erupted from the ground. It wasn't a tendril. It wasn't a limb. It was part of the planet itself, an organic column of raw flesh and bone, stretching unnaturally, its surface quivering as if struggling to hold a form. And then it moved toward them. Nico stumbled backward with a choked scream. His boot sank, not into loose soil, but into something that clamped down on his leg. The terrain beneath him had peeled open, revealing an unfathomable depth of writhing, black tendrils, slick and glistening like the inside of a throat. They wrapped around his calf, climbing higher, merging into the fabric of his suit. "Help! Help me!" Reese lunged forward, grabbing Nico's arm and yanking hard, but the ground was devouring him. The tendrils weren't pulling him under. They were growing into him. Nico convulsed violently as something burrowed into his flesh. His screams became wet, guttural sounds, his veins blackening from the inside out. The tendrils that had ensnared him were no longer separate. They had become his veins, threading through his skin, bulging as if something was moving inside them. Cole was hyperventilating, gun raised but shaking. "Cut him loose. We have to." Lydia grabbed a laser scalpel from her belt and sliced into the tendrils, but the second the blade touched them, they twitched and recoiled, only to regrow instantly, pulling deeper into Nico's body. Then his face split open. Not a wound, a transformation. The skin along his jaw peeled back, stretching upward, reshaping, merging. His bones bent unnaturally, his spine elongating with grotesque snaps. His right arm melted into the living terrain, no longer an appendage but a root, digging into the pulsing, breathing earth. For a moment he wasn't Nico anymore. He was something else, something that belonged to PX-119 now. Then he stopped moving. His face was frozen in a grotesque half-scream, half-smile, his eyes glassy and dark, veins throbbing. And then he spoke, but it wasn't his voice. It was a chorus, layered, wrong. "Stay." The word rippled through the air, vibrating through their bones like an unspoken command. Nico lurched forward, dragging himself from the earth like a newborn pulled from the womb. He was no longer fully human. His skin was translucent, his ribs distended as something pulsed beneath them. The tendrils that had consumed him now hung from his body like exposed nerves, moving on their own, twitching as though tasting the air. Then the planet itself screamed. A deep, resonant howl erupted from the canyon, rattling the very air around them. The walls contracted, the living tissue of the planet folding inward, dragging itself closed. Nico, or what was left of him, twisted unnaturally, his elongated limbs pulling toward the canyon's closing mouth as if called home. And then, in a blur of unnatural motion, he vanished into the flesh of the world. For a moment, the only sound was their own panicked breathing. Then Malcolm broke. "What the fuck was that? What the fuck was that?" He was shouting, shaking, his hands gripping his rifle so hard his knuckles were white. Reese pulled him back. "Move. We have to move." Lydia turned to run, but something stopped her. The ground was shifting, not shaking, rearranging. The terrain where Nico had been consumed was smoothing over, sealing itself shut. No sign he had ever been there. The planet was digesting him. Lydia shuddered. "It's not just alive." Cole stared at the terrain, still gasping for air. "Then what is it?" Lydia swallowed hard. "It's feeding." Reese didn't hesitate. He grabbed Cole by the shoulder. "Run!" They sprinted toward the ship, the landscape pulsing beneath them, the distant hum growing into a rhythmic, breathing cadence. The planet had let them land. It had let them explore. And now it was testing them. The Exodus was less than half a mile away, its beacon blinking in the darkness, their only salvation. But as they ran, the terrain shifted, stretching, warping, forcing them further from the ship with each desperate step. The ground was against them now, and the world was still hungry. The ship was close, too close, and yet impossibly far. Reese's boots pounded against the shifting ground as he led the charge toward the Exodus, his breath ragged in his ears. The terrain beneath them was no longer just moving. It was reacting. The soft, fleshy ridges contracted and stretched, subtly altering their path, forcing them sideways, even as they sprinted toward their only chance of survival. It wasn't random. It was intentional. PX-119 wasn't just alive, it was aware. "Move! Don't stop!" Reese barked, his voice hoarse. Cole was panting hard behind him, his grip tight on his rifle, his face slick with sweat inside his helmet. Malcolm kept glancing back, muttering curses under his breath. And Lydia knew. She didn't say it out loud, but she felt it. The ground had changed. It wasn't letting them leave. Then something tore free from the earth behind them. A grotesque shape, tall, twisted, its surface slick and writhing with shifting masses of bone and tissue, erupted from the terrain like a cancerous growth. It was neither fully formed nor undefined, its structure impossibly fluid, reshaping as it rose, mimicking the fragments of things it had consumed before. Nico's face was there, stretched across its shifting mass like a still living mask, his mouth silent yet screaming, eyes unfocused and empty. But he wasn't alone. Other faces, other bodies, distorted and half-formed, embedded into the flesh of the thing, fused into the planet's own ever-evolving structure. It wasn't just growing, it was making more. Cole screamed. Oh, fuck. Fuck! The creature lunged, its massive, fleshy limbs snapping forward, their edges lined with jagged, bone-like growths that scraped across the air like serrated knives. Malcolm barely dodged in time, stumbling onto his hands and knees as the ground flexed beneath him, attempting to pull him in. Reese fired his rifle. Pointless. The rounds tore through the mass, but the wounds simply sealed shut, flesh folding inward, absorbing the damage like the planet itself was regenerating in real time. It was playing with them. Lydia yanked Malcolm to his feet, her pulse hammering in her skull. It's learning. Cole didn't hear her. He was still staring at Nico's distorted face, still staring at the dozens of other faces trapped in the thing's ever-moving skin. Some of them were human. Others were not. How many people had landed on PX-119 before them? And how many had been taken? The ship. The ship was their only chance. Reese grabbed Cole by the collar and dragged him forward. Run! And then, the ground cracked open. A gaping maw of flesh and muscle, lined with jagged ridges of exposed vertebrae, split the earth in a grotesque, yawning chasm of raw hunger. It wasn't a mouth in the traditional sense. It was a wound, an impossible biological mechanism, something birthed from the very planet itself. A gap in the terrain that wasn't there before, but now had always been there, like a cancer that had gone unnoticed until it was too late. And it inhaled. The force yanked them all backward, pulling the air, the dust, the very atmosphere itself into its endless throat. Cole was too close. He screamed as he tumbled forward, his arms flailing. Reese caught him. Barely, but something else caught him too. Tendrils, slick, veined, pulsing like exposed nerves, shot up from the edges of the planet's open wound, wrapping around Cole's torso and arms, dragging him down into the chasm's endless dark. Lydia lunged, grabbing his other arm. No! Cole was gasping, his body convulsing as the tendrils burrowed beneath his suit, pushing into his skin, veins bulging as something moved inside him. His mouth twisted, stretching wider, until the bones in his jaw cracked. And then he stopped struggling. His eyes locked onto Lydia's. Something wrong in them. Something that wasn't him anymore. And he let go. Lydia screamed. Cole vanished into the maw, swallowed whole by the writhing, living landscape, his body absorbed without a trace. Then, the wound sealed shut, like he had never existed. A horrific silence followed. The team was one less now. Malcolm's voice broke. We have to get off this fucking planet. Lydia staggered back, her legs barely holding her weight. She felt cold, her stomach churning. She knew she had just witnessed something worse than death. Cole wasn't dead. He was part of it now. Reese pulled her forward. We keep moving. No stopping. No looking back. Lydia clenched her teeth, fighting against the hollow dread creeping into her chest. She didn't say what she was thinking. They weren't going to make it. PX-119 had decided they were staying, and it was still hungry. The Exodus was less than 200 meters away. The blinking navigation beacon cut through the oppressive dark, an artificial light on a world that was never meant to host anything human. They sprinted. Malcolm, Lydia, Reese, the last survivors. The planet fought them with every step. The ground beneath them shifted, growing slick, rearranging itself, forming deep, pulsing ridges that forced them away from the direct path to the ship. The air thickened, vibrating with an eerie resonance, a sound that wasn't sound, something pressing against their bones, their minds. The planet whispered. Lydia felt it in her skull, in her teeth, like a vibration too deep for human ears. It wasn't words, but it was speaking to them. She knew what it was saying. Stay. Malcolm tripped. The ground reacted instantly, flesh splitting open beneath him. No! Lydia lunged forward, catching his arm just as something wet and veined shot up from the chasm, wrapping around his ankle, his leg, pulling him down. Reese fired his rifle, but the bullets did nothing. The tendrils weren't just grabbing him, they were burrowing in. Malcolm screamed, his body convulsing violently, his veins blackening, his flesh rippling with unnatural movement. Lydia gritted her teeth, pulling with everything she had. Reese grabbed Malcolm's other arm, his face twisted in raw desperation. For a moment, they had him. Then the planet took him anyway. With a sickening wet pop, Malcolm's skin tore at the shoulders, his arms ripping away in their grasp as the rest of him was sucked down into the pulsing, hungry abyss. Lydia screamed. Reese grabbed her, dragging her back. Move! Move! They ran, the ship so close now, the Exodus their only salvation. The air around them thickened, the whisper becoming a chorus, a layered, distorted voice that was not one voice but many. Lydia knew those voices. Cole, Nico, Malcolm. All of them merged into the voice of PX-119. They weren't dead. They had become it. Her chest tightened with horror. The thing had absorbed them, reshaped them into something new, something woven into the living fabric of this monstrous world. And soon it would do the same to her. The ship's ramp was lowering. Helena had the airlock open, her face pale, eyes wide as she saw them approaching. Come on, come on! Lydia and Reese pushed forward, their lungs burning. Then the ground split apart ahead of them. A wall of shifting, grotesque mass erupted from the terrain, blocking their path. An amalgamation of bodies, bones and tendrils fused into a monstrous barrier. And they saw them. Cole's face, Malcolm's face, dozens of others. Twisted, not alive but not dead, their skin stretched thin over the writhing core of the planet's endless hunger. And they reached out. Reese shoved Lydia forward. Go! Lydia hesitated. Reese turned, firing directly into the mass, giving her seconds, the only seconds she needed. She lunged, slipping past the closing wall onto the ramp. She turned. Reese was gone. His rifle clattered to the ground, its barrel smoking. The tendrils were already pulling his screaming form into the living abyss, his mouth stretching wide, his bones shifting, reshaping as he was remade. Reese! Lydia screamed. Helena grabbed her, dragging her inside. We can't save him. We have to go. Lydia fought, but Helena slammed the airlock controls. The ramp sealed. The ship's engines roared to life. The Exodus lurched upward, thrusters burning white-hot, tearing free from the shifting, reaching mass below. The world screamed. The whispers became a shriek, a deafening wail of frustration, of hunger denied. The ship broke free of the atmosphere, punching into the void of space, leaving PX-119 behind. Lydia collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath, her body shaking violently. Helena crouched beside her. "It's over," she said. Lydia's hands trembled, her vision blurred with something dark, something writhing beneath her skin. She could still hear them, whispering, inside her. Because they hadn't escaped, PX-119 was inside them now, waiting.